Su Feng looked in the direction of the voice and immediately saw a boy with sparse, yellowish hair and a timid expression. "Do you need something from me?" he asked quietly, a hint of displeasure crossing his face as class was not yet over. The boy's face paled, and his voice grew weaker, but he was clearly unwilling to give up. "I came to tell you that I foresee you being involved in a murder." Before Su Feng could respond, the classroom erupted in uncontrollable laughter, so intense it seemed to shake the floor. The boy's face turned even paler, his health clearly falling into the poor category. He hung his head nervously, as if searching for a crack in the floor to crawl into. Su Feng made a helpless expression, his gaze sweeping across the LCD board, the one-dimensional nature of time, the topic of today's class. Su Feng waved his hand, a habitual gesture to signal the end of the lesson. Whistling and cheers filled the room, and within a few minutes, the large classroom was empty except for him and the boy. "All right, who sent you to play this joke on me?" Su Feng asked with interest. "Please believe me, Professor Su," the boy said, growing anxious. "My predictions are always accurate. In about 2 hours, around 11 a.m., you are likely to be involved in a murder." Su Feng glanced at his long, pale arm and couldn't help but laugh. "If your prediction is so accurate, why did you use the word likely? I can accurately and thoroughly predict events within 600 seconds. Beyond that, I can only foresee parts of events, and the longer the time frame, the more blurred the details. So, for now, I can only say that a murder will happen in 2 hours, but I don't know the other specifics yet." Su Feng looked at the boy curiously. He felt as though he couldn't completely dismiss what the boy was saying. There seemed to be something about the boy, something not fitting for his age, that made it impossible to ignore him. Especially the way he spoke, almost as if delivering a prophecy. A prophecy? Why did that word come to mind? Suddenly, a vague sense of unease crept into Su Feng's heart. "So, why are you telling me this? And why should I believe you?" Su Feng tried to keep his voice calm. He had a strange feeling, as if he had seen this boy before. His rational mind told him this was impossible, but he couldn't stop himself from thinking it. "I'm telling you because my teacher, his name was Lin Xian. Do you remember him? He once told me that you were his best friend." For a moment, it felt like something had struck Su Feng in the chest. Lin Xian, a name so distant, it felt like it belonged to a past life. That fair-skinned, delicate, and cheerful young man, always surrounded by a certain elegance. That young man who loved to debate endlessly. That Lin Xian, was it him? Su Feng murmured. "How is he?" "He's dead," the boy said calmly, with a composure that seemed out of place for his age. "You don't seem to care about his death? I mean, he was your teacher." About 10 minutes before his death, I had already replayed the entire process in my mind. So when he actually died, it felt like watching a movie replay. You may not understand this, but if you had the same experience, you wouldn't be surprised by anything that happens. Then, can you tell me how he died? Long-term depression damaged almost his entire physical and mental system. He had many illnesses. Of course, the direct cause was that he committed suicide. Su Feng was shocked. "Suicide? But you said you foresaw his death. If it was suicide, why didn't you stop him?" The boy raised his head in confusion. "My teacher once told me that predictions that can be changed are just tricks by charlatans, and his research into prediction was pure science." "Didn't he tell you that?" "Told me?" Su Feng repeated the words, his expression becoming a bit dazed. "I was his best friend, right? That's what he said, wasn't it?" "Of course he told me, but how long ago was that? 15 years? Maybe 17? Back then, the campus seemed better than it is now. The air always filled with the scent of fresh grass. And of course, most importantly, Su Feng was much younger then. He had 2 best friends, Lin Xian and Wei Jieru. Of course, I understand what you mean. You want to deduce the subsequent state of an event from its initial state, right? But this has already been proven impossible." Su Feng waved his hand casually. "The development of modern quantum mechanics has overturned the theoretical basis of the prediction model. Many times before, I couldn't out-argue you. But this time you're definitely going to lose. If you don't believe me, let's ask the professor together." "You misunderstood me." What I'm talking about is precisely considering the impact of quantum effects. In other words, incorporating quantum effects into the prediction model. Wait, Su Feng interjected. I'm a bit confused by what you're saying. One of the most important aspects of quantum effects is the uncertainty principle. According to this principle, it's not only impossible to predict the future development of an event, but it's also impossible to accurately describe the initial state of the event. So how are you going to establish a model? Lin Xian smiled meaningfully. Perhaps we don't need to know the initial state of the event. Su Feng couldn't help but laugh. He thought Lin Xian must have a fever today. Are you saying that without knowing where Wei Jieru is now? You can tell me where to find her half an hour later? All right, if you can do that, I'll believe you. Are you two looking for me? Do you need me to be the judge again? Wei Jieru suddenly appeared from around the corner of the teaching building, startling both Su Feng and Lin Xian. Wei Jieru was 5 or 6 years younger than them and had just entered her second year of college. Su Feng acted as if he had seen a savior, nearly jumping up. Lin Xian wants to be a prophet. I said he's ridiculous, so this time you should be on my side, right? Wei Jieru smiled with her lips pressed together. Based on past experience, if I support you, I'll definitely lose. Su Feng was anxious. This time is different. If you support Lin Xian, you'll be totally irrational. Your father would definitely oppose him. Wei Jieru watched the two top students of her father argue endlessly with great interest, yet she felt an odd sense of happiness. Su Feng and Lin Xian had been arguing like this for almost 6 or 7 years, right? They were both the type of students who never seemed to grow up, but no one could deny how excellent they both were. In contrast, Lin Xian was quite modest. You should still support Su Feng. I don't have much confidence in my idea this time. Wei Jieru smiled playfully. Since you both want me to do this, I'll do the opposite. I'm supporting Lin Xian. But for some reason, Wei Jieru blushed slightly as she said this, though her tone was unusually firm. Su Feng's expression dimmed a little, and his voice lowered. Let's ask the professor to judge, he paused. Or maybe not. It's not really a meaningful question, right, Lin Xian? Lin Xian nodded in agreement. Almost every day, they would argue over some new idea, most of which wouldn't actually impact their research. At best, it was a kind of mental exercise. Of course, if this argument were to end here, that would be it. But things might take a different turn later on. Unfortunately, there's no such thing as an if in the real world. The whole thing started when the blushing Wei Jieru, unusually, decided to take it seriously this time. She insisted on going to Lin Xian and Su Feng's professor to prove the point. Of course, the so-called professor was none other than her father, Wei Jiang. The boy looked at Su Feng, who was lost in thought, with some confusion. He wanted to speak but held back. It was clear that he was more mature than his peers. Su Feng realized his lapse and coughed to cover it up. So, where have you been living all these years? Our home has actually been in this city. The teacher mentioned moving several times, but in the end, he never made the decision. I didn't really understand what he meant, but I think he couldn't bear to leave this city. I forgot to tell you, I've actually known you and your wife for a long time. Su Feng grew interested. How did you know us? Teacher Lin and I followed you many times. I don't know why he did it, but I could tell he cared about you both. However, he always avoided meeting you. Su Feng's eyes grew warm. What did he say to you? He just said that you two were the best friends he ever had in his life. He also said the happiest and most cherished days of his life were those spent with you. Su Feng was silent for a while. Let's talk about your premonition. You said I would be involved in a murder. What exactly does that mean? Will I be killed, or will I kill someone, or will I just be a witness? If I kill someone, could it be an accidental killing? I don't know yet, but soon I will, definitely sometime before the event actually happens. The boy answered seriously, but no matter what the result of my premonition is, it can't be changed, because something must really happen later for me to be able to foresee it in the first place. Please remember this, it's very important. Even though the boy's words were a bit of a tongue twister, Su Feng understood. He looked at the boy thoughtfully. What is your relationship with Lin Xian? I mean, you two look very much alike. The boy hesitated for a few seconds before saying, Teacher Lin once told me that, genetically speaking, we are the same person. I carry all his individual traits. He didn't have a wife. Cloning? Su Feng wasn't too surprised. From the moment he met the boy, he had felt a strange sense of familiarity, and the boy's answer merely confirmed his suspicion. But what puzzled Su Feng was why Lin Xian had used such a complex technique to create a descendant. For a serious scientist, cloning, while it had advantages such as preserving all the parents' traits, wasn't suitable for human reproduction because it eliminated the variability that played a key role in biological evolution. Lin Xian would surely have known this. So why did he do it? After all these years, had he still not forgotten the past? I think so, the boy replied, not noticing that Su Feng was lost in thought again. He quickly brought the conversation back to the premonition. I've got some new information about the murder event. You will, in some circumstances, kill someone. Yes, that's it. Is that so? Su Feng's heart skipped a beat. From the moment Lin Xian's name was mentioned, he could no longer ignore the boy's words, even though rationally he found it hard to accept such a notion. But this was Lin Xian's theory, only spoken through the boy's mouth. In Su Feng's memory, in his countless debates with Lin Xian, he was always on the losing side. Except for that one time. But did he really stand on the side of truth that time? After dinner, Professor Wei Yijiang was watering the bonsai in the garden, a habit he had maintained for many years. The Wei residence was a quaint little house nestled on a tree-lined hillside. After watering the plants, Wei Yijiang returned to his study to work, another unshakable routine. As a renowned contemporary physicist, Wei Yijiang had a wealth of achievements and publications to his name, but what brought him the most satisfaction was his outstanding students, especially Lin Xian and Su Feng. To be honest, it was hard for Wei Yijiang to see them as mere students anymore. He often thought of them as his assistants and friends. They were simply too brilliant. Many of the clever ideas in his work stemmed from their brilliant minds. At the upcoming World Physics Congress early next year, Wei Yijiang planned to include their names in a paper that was destined to cause a sensation and honor they rightfully deserved. The world would be stunned by the rise of two new stars. Wei Yijiang was well aware of how much he cherished them, so much so that whenever Wei Jieru accused him of being biased, he would readily admit it. Thinking of Wei Jieru's angry expression, a faint smile appeared on Wei Yijiang's face. His beloved daughter was his greatest joy outside of scientific research. In fact, Wei Yijiang, with his meticulous and rigorous scientific thinking, had already predicted that his future son-in-law would be one of the two, Lin Xian or Su Feng. In his spare time, he had even come up with a name for his future grandson or granddaughter, Xiao Zhao, though he didn't yet know if the child would bear the surname Lin or Su. Judging by recent developments, it seemed more likely that his grandson would be named Lin Xiao Zhao. Once, he had teased Wei Jieru about this, and her expected response was, I don't know. Now, noise erupted outside the door, and without looking, Wei Yijiang knew that Wei Jieru must have returned, with Lin Xian and Su Feng, who always argued as soon as they met. Wei Yijiang could never understand how they found so many things to debate, sometimes over issues that most people wouldn't bother with. But perhaps that was what made them different. Einstein once said, most people in childhood believe they already understand basic concepts like time and space, and thus never think about them again. I, however, only began pondering such questions in adulthood, and that's how I discovered something new. Perhaps Lin Xian and Su Feng's arguments were the same. In the end, Lin Xian always seemed to have the upper hand. From Wei Yijiang's perspective, Su Feng was undoubtedly excellent, but Lin Xian was a genius. In Wei Yijiang's dictionary, the word genius was rarely used. He believed it was an exaggerated term. Every person carries billions of years of evolution, so how much greater could one person be than another? But when he met Lin Xian, his view changed. Wei Yijiang had achieved far more than most in his life, yet he didn't consider himself a genius, just someone who, like Su Feng, could be called outstanding. The difference between them and ordinary people was only diligence and focus. But Lin Xian was different. He wasn't more diligent than Su Feng, but his insights were always deeper. Sometimes, his intuition in a split second coincided with conclusions Wei Yijiang reached after long deliberation. Maybe that was genius. If their debates became too unrealistic or descended into word games, Wei Yijiang, as their mentor, would intervene. After all, he was a serious physicist. and he couldn't tolerate any violation of basic scientific principles even in casual debate. Sure enough, all three friends had gathered. Wei Jieru, upon seeing her father, immediately called out, "Dad, come and judge." They're arguing again, and this time Su Feng says Lin Xian is definitely wrong. She smiled slightly, but based on past experience, I'm still voting for Lin Xian. What's going on? Wei Jiang frowned playfully and set aside his work. Tell me. As long as it's not a matter of principle, I'm ready to support Su Feng. Let's call it even. Lin Xian says he has a way to predict the future. Su Feng briefly summarized their earlier conversation. His voice was low, as if he wasn't particularly pleased that their mentor had offered to support him. I see. Wei Jiang was a little surprised. Although these two students often amazed him, he didn't expect them to be arguing about the ancient problem of prediction. This topic, like the perpetual motion machine, shouldn't be brought up again. But since it was Lin Xian who raised it, he must have his unique perspective. Wei Jiang turned to him. What's your theoretical basis? Lin Xian blushed slightly. I only thought of it by chance last week. It's not a fully developed idea. Wei Jiang was surprised again. He noted Lin Xian's tone, which suggested he believed he was right, just not mature yet. Wei Jiang realized he had to weigh in on this. But first, he wanted to hear Lin Xian's thoughts. Don't hold back, tell us. Lin Xian nodded. Actually, I thought of this after I happened to revisit a description of a classic physics experiment last week. What experiment? Wei Jiang asked nervously. He couldn't recall any classic experiment related to prediction. It's the ideal experiment used to demonstrate the wave-particle duality of microscopic particles. The basic idea is to fire photons one by one through a screen with two slits. Suppose at a certain moment the photon has already passed through the screen. It might have passed through one slit, if it behaved as a particle, or it might have passed through both slits simultaneously, if it behaved as a wave. In any case, one of these things must have happened, and it's already irreversible. Now, here's the key point. If we place a photosensitive plate behind the screen, we'll see interference patterns, which shows the photon passed through both slits behaving as a wave. But if we place counters behind the slits, we'll see only one counter registering, meaning the photon passed through one slit, behaving as a particle. In simple terms, what this experiment suggests is that whether the photon passed through one slit or both is a past event, but the outcome depends on something that happens afterward. I believe this shows that cause and effect aren't always clearly separable, and maybe they even interact. Wait, Su Feng interrupted. I know this experiment, but I don't recall it leading to the conclusion you just made. Wei Jiang sighed inwardly, thinking that if someone had reached that conclusion back then, Lin Xian wouldn't be considered a genius now. But he didn't agree with Lin Xian's point. That only applies to the microscopic world. In the macroscopic world, what you're talking about doesn't exist. Lin Xian suddenly raised his voice. But how can we draw a clear line between the microscopic and macroscopic worlds? The microscopic world is what determines everything. The macroscopic world is just the statistical effect of the microscopic. If we can prove that cause and effect can interact in the microscopic realm, then the same must hold true in the macroscopic world. Wei Jiang's expression grew serious. He glanced instinctively at the paper on his desk, titled A Proof of the Completeness of Modern Physics. This was the paper he was preparing to present at the World Physics Congress, a monumental work that represented the culmination of his life's efforts. It seemed he was now in a situation similar to that of the Swiss mathematician Freya, who, upon nearing the completion of his work on deriving arithmetic from logic, received a letter from Russell about a paradox, causing the foundation of his theory to collapse. Wei Jieru didn't fully understand what was happening, but she vaguely sensed that Lin Xian had the upper hand in this debate, and even her father seemed stumped. She had never seen her father look so grave. From a girl's perspective, she wanted to cheer because she had chosen the right side again, but she held back. The atmosphere wasn't right. Wei Jieru gave a mischievous smile and tried to lighten the mood. Let me tell a story. There was a man shopping, and he saw human brains for sale at the counter. He walked up to a brain labeled Einstein and asked how much it cost. The clerk told him $5,000. Then he walked up to a brain labeled ordinary person and asked how much that one cost. The clerk said $10,000. Surprised, He walked up to a brain labeled Su Feng and asked for the price. The clerk told him it was $100,000. So, what's going on? There's a prize for the right answer. Su Feng looked confused as he scratched his head. Why is my brain more expensive than Einstein's? And by so much? Are you complimenting me? He turned to Lin Xian for help, but Lin Xian only smiled knowingly without speaking. Wei Jiru proudly declared, "You don't know, do you? Here's the answer. Einstein's brain was fully used, while Su Feng's brain has never been used, so of course, a brand new one is more expensive." Su Feng's face turned red, and he wanted to respond but couldn't find the words. Unexpectedly, Wei Jiang suddenly lost his temper. He slammed the table and said, "Xiaoru, stop fooling around." The room instantly fell silent, and no one spoke for a long time. After a while, Wei Yijiang waved his hand and, with a tired look, held his forehead. "You all go out. I want to be alone for a while." The boy remained silent, sensing it was better not to speak. He didn't quite understand why Su Feng kept spacing out, only responding when Su Feng asked him questions. To be honest, he didn't like these situations and was now feeling a bit homesick. The thought of home brought a warmth to his heart, even though it had changed beyond recognition. He had grown up there, familiar with every inch of the place. From the age of 2 or 3, he had undergone regular brain surgeries every few months. At first, he was scared, but after so many times, he became indifferent. He didn't know what was being added or removed from his brain during each operation, but as the surgeries continued, he began to notice strange sounds in his mind and blurry images before his eyes. Even his way of speaking became different from others. Once, while playing in a field with other children, he saw fish scale clouds in the sky. One of the kids said, "The fishhook clouds mean it's going to rain soon." But the boy corrected, "You've got it backwards. It's because it's going to rain that there are fishhook clouds." At that moment, he noticed Lin Xian standing nearby, a look of joy flashing across his face. To this day, the boy didn't understand why Lin Xian had destroyed almost everything in their home, including the equipment he had designed himself, just before his death. Lin Xian had seemed almost mad at the time, his face pale, his unshaven beard wild, and his eyes filled with a frenzied light. "You're going to die soon," the boy had said timidly, hiding behind a bookcase in fear. Lin Xian had frozen, slowly turning his head. "You've foreseen my death? How do I die?" "You die by suicide," the boy whispered. "I have thought of killing myself, but I don't know when. Now that you've foreseen it, I guess I have no more than 10 minutes left." Lin Xian had strangely calmed down. He lit a cigarette, and the swirling smoke made him look more like the Lin Xian from many years ago. He had forced a smile. "Maybe it's for the best. There really isn't much point in me living anymore. The pain of illness every day is unbearable," and Lin Xian hadn't finished. He lovingly reached out to touch the boy's head, but the boy shrank back in fear. Lin Xian had quickly understood. "You make me proud. Yes, you've been right again. Just now, I had the urge to kill you. You won't kill me. My premonition shows that I will still be alive after you die. I moved away just out of instinct." "I'm sorry," the boy had said honestly. Lin Xian had sighed. "Yes, how could I kill you? You're the culmination of my life's work, the proof of all my rights and wrongs." Rights and wrongs. Only now do I realize how pointless it is to spend a lifetime proving them. If a merciful God gave me health, I'd devote the rest of my life to researching time machines. I so desperately want to go back, to reset the positions I misplaced in the past. The boy had nodded thoughtfully. "I understand how you feel." "No, you don't understand," Lin Xian had shouted. "Because of that question, I lost everything I ever had. My teacher, my friends, all the most beautiful things in life left me. And her." Lin Xian's face had twisted in pain, tears streaming from his eyes. "Maybe I was right, but I would rather have been wrong. Then I could go back to my teacher and ask for forgiveness for my youthful ignorance. He would surely pat my shoulder, as he did many times before, and say, 'What's the fear of being wrong? Youth's greatest asset is the chance to correct mistakes.'" But Lin Xian had glared at the boy. "You proved that I was right." The boy had taken 2 steps back instinctively. "You can't kill me. That won't happen. Yes, what doesn't appear in your premonition won't happen. But why did this happen? What did God mean by bringing you into this world? Lin Xian had shivered, his expression clearing a bit. Let me think. So far, none of your premonitions have ever failed. Did you foresee how I will commit suicide? The boy had glanced at a finely crafted razor lying by the balcony, where a faint blue light glimmered on its blade. You'll take that razor. Lin Xian had burst into laughter, tears streaming down his face. God, you're so merciful, letting me achieve such brilliance. This child has said exactly what I had in mind. Lin Xian had stopped laughing and stared at the boy, his gaze becoming unfocused. You're my creation. Your ability is something I gave you. No, I need to prove you wrong. You must be wrong. Then I can go back to my teacher. I can see Jieru and Su Feng again. I'll tell them I was wrong. Ask for their forgiveness. They will forgive me. They surely will. And we'll be together again. Watch, I'll prove you're wrong. Even just once is enough, and I'll be able to return. Wait, you said the razor, didn't you? I'll throw it away. Throw it away. Lin Xian had become frenzied, a wild light radiating from his eyes, his entire being engulfed by the anticipation of a happiness yet to come. The razor, he had muttered, lunging towards the balcony like a leopard, moving with a speed unimaginable for someone so ill. Grabbing the razor with disgust, he had used all his strength to hurl it away. But he had forgotten one thing: the enormous inertia of his sprint, compounded by the motion of throwing the razor, had caused him to lose his balance. In the boy's vision, Lin Xian had looked like a fledgling bird, still covered in down, attempting to fly but instead plunging heavily from the balcony 30 meters above the ground. The boy hadn't followed to check on Lin Xian's injuries, because in his premonition, Lin Xian had died at that exact moment. He remained where he was, murmuring quietly to himself, I said you took the razor and jumped. Su Feng sighed, his gaze resting on the boy. He asked softly, what else did Lin Xian say about us? The boy thought for a moment and replied, he said he wished he were wrong, so he could return to you all. I think he still felt that way up until his death. Wished he was wrong? Su Feng felt a chill in his heart. Anyone could hear the weight of those words. Could it be that Lin Xian really discovered a way to predict the future? To be honest, even if Su Feng were somehow involved in a murder case in the near future, he still wouldn't dare to believe it, as it would contradict all established theories. About 15 years ago, at that World Physics Conference, Wei Yijiang presented a groundbreaking paper, co-authored with Su Feng, titled A Proof of the Completeness of Modern Physics. It was the most comprehensive and perfect explanation of the material world humanity had ever achieved. It fit with all observable phenomena and successfully predicted many material properties that had yet to be discovered, pushing humanity's understanding of the world to a new height. It provided classic explanations for major questions about the nature of matter, motion, causality, and the relationship between time, space, and matter. So far, no fact had contradicted it. For Su Feng, that year had been thrilling. The paper was successfully published, and his mentor Wei Yijiang reached the pinnacle of his achievements. Su Feng himself began to emerge as a leading figure among the new generation of physicists. More importantly, in the fall of that year, 6 months after Lin Xian's disappearance, Wei Jieru became his bride. On their wedding day, Su Feng truly felt like the happiest man in the world. Even today, he could still clearly recall every scene from that day. He said that, the boy added earnestly, sensing Su Feng's skepticism. But I think he was right. My premonition confirms it. But do you understand that if you're right, then we were all wrong? Su Feng said calmly. I don't quite understand what you mean. Whether you're right or wrong shouldn't be judged by me, but by the outcome of events, the boy said with a hint of innocence in his eyes. Whether my premonition is right follows the same standard. Don't you think? Su Feng was momentarily speechless, unsure how to respond to the boy's retort. He smiled, not wanting to get tangled in this question, and held the boy's hand. Let's talk about your life these past years. Has it been good? The boy's expression darkened, and his voice became softer. I don't think I've had a good life, and I think the teacher felt the same. His health was always poor. Too much research destroyed his body. We also had financial difficulties. Sometimes the teacher had to take on several jobs just to cover daily expenses. When I was younger, his temper was better, but it worsened over time. His drinking also increased. He learned to drink? Su Feng was shocked. He remembered Lin Xian detesting alcohol, or anything that could damage the brain, even refusing to drink tea of any kind. He started drinking nearly 400 milliliters of hard liquor every day. When he got drunk, he'd say things that no one could understand, and he mentioned your names. The boy looked frightened, his frail body trembling slightly. Su Feng felt a wave of sadness wash over him, and he suddenly pulled the boy into a hug. From a genetic standpoint, he was holding Lin Xian in his arms. Don't be afraid. From now on, you'll stay with us. This will be your home. Everyone will love you. The boy looked at Su Feng with some confusion, but soon relaxed. Su Feng's warm embrace made him reluctant to pull away. The teacher was right. He said you were the best people in the world. Child, whether your premonition is right or wrong, I will take good care of you. In a little while, you'll come home with me. It's warmer there than anywhere else, Su Feng said emotionally, already thinking of the boy as Lin Xian. Is it really warm there? The boy's face lit up with anticipation, but then he suddenly remembered something. But why did my teacher leave back then? Su Feng froze for a moment, as if he hadn't expected the boy to ask such a question. His gaze became distant, and he murmured, Yes, your teacher left us. That was many years ago, but it feels like it just happened yesterday. I cannot agree with you, Lin Xian said, his voice rising with emotion. He couldn't understand why the professor was so adamant that he was wrong. There isn't an insurmountable gap between the microscopic and macroscopic worlds. In fact, the microscopic determines the macroscopic. That's undeniable. Wei Yijiang's expression was hard to read. He couldn't remember a time when Lin Xian had confronted him so directly. After their last debate, Wei Yijiang had spent nearly half a month researching Lin Xian's theory, trying to integrate it into the framework of the proof of the completeness of modern physics. But as his research deepened, he realized this was impossible because the two theories were fundamentally incompatible. The completeness of modern physics theory required the acceptance of causality in the material world, at least in the macroscopic realm. Lin Xian's theory, however, described a world of causal nihilism. In that world, causes could not determine outcomes, and the relationship between them was parallel, as Lin Xian had described in his experiment where the outcome could influence the cause. Wei Yijiang knew this posed a serious threat to his life's work. The completeness of modern physics framework, by its very nature, could not tolerate any counterexamples. Scientific history was full of theories overturned by just one or two exceptions, such as when the theories of ether and energy equipartition shook the foundations of Newtonian mechanics in the early 20th century. Wei Yijiang was convinced that Lin Xian's hypothesis was wrong. He just hadn't yet found a way to refute it. After a few seconds of silence, Wei Yijiang spoke slowly. Regarding the experiment you mentioned, according to classical quantum mechanics, the behavior of microscopic particles resists causal analysis. Under those conditions, it's meaningless to ask which slit the particle passed through. But you're talking about the classical explanation, Lin Xian responded, his voice growing firmer. I don't think this explanation solves the problem, it seems to evade it. At least we can say that in some cases, the result can influence the cause, and that's the foundation of my theory of premonition. According to this theory, when an event leads to different outcomes, each different outcome affects the earlier stages of the event, creating different signs. This makes premonition possible. Su Feng looked helplessly at both sides of the argument, feeling unable to intervene. He hadn't expected a casually raised question to cause so much trouble. He wasn't sure which side to take. On principle, he leaned toward his mentor's view, but it was clear that Wei Yijiang had not succeeded in convincing Lin Xian. From an objective standpoint, Su Feng felt that Lin Xian even had the upper hand. Every time Lin Xian spoke, Wei Yijiang fell into deep thought, clearly wrestling with the argument. But do you understand what premonition means? Wei Yijiang, rarely seen flustered, blushed slightly. In a system where outcomes can influence causes, everything becomes unstable like a paradox in logic. Remember Russell's barber paradox? The barber can only shave those who don't shave themselves. So, obviously, he he can never decide whether to shave himself. According to the rule, he must both shave and not shave himself at the same time. This is exactly the type of mutual influence between cause and effect that you're talking about. But isn't that just a word game? In strict physics, we've never encountered such phenomena. Su Feng's eyes lit up. For a moment, he almost wanted to shout, "Bravo, Professor!" This was the language of a physics master, succinct, cutting right to the heart of the matter. No analogy could be more fitting. In Su Feng's mind, the debate was already over. His mentor's few words were enough to end this argument, which shouldn't have started in the first place. The thought of returning to the harmonious life they had before filled Su Feng with joy. But Lin Xian frowned. No one could know what was going on in his mind at that moment, but when his frown eased, it was clear that he had found an answer. He said, somewhat awkwardly, "There is such a phenomenon in physics." Su Feng doubted his ears. He turned to look at Wei Yijiang and found him wearing the same expression of disbelief. Su Feng turned back to stare at Lin Xian, as if he were looking at a stranger. He had never imagined that a paradox like this, purely a logical problem, could have a corresponding phenomenon in the real world that was absolutely impossible. Lin Xian uttered two words, "electric bell." Wei Yijiang's face turned pale, as if struck by something in that instant. Yes, the electric bell. The principle of the electric bell is that it interrupts its own circuit by being energized, and by interrupting the circuit, it re-energizes, causing it to vibrate continuously. After a long pause, Wei Yijiang sighed. Maybe I really am getting old. He glanced at the manuscript of the proof of the completeness of modern physics on his desk, a complex expression in his eyes. From the side, Su Feng exclaimed, "But that's just an extreme exception. It doesn't prove anything. It's no threat to the grand system of the proof of the completeness of modern physics. Solving it within the system is just a matter of time." Su Feng's words seemed to remind Wei Yijiang, and his spirits lifted slightly. Indeed, scientific history had many similar precedents. Sometimes, people had to wait for new experimental conditions or factors to emerge in order to fully confirm a theory. For example, in 1906, not long after the introduction of special relativity, Kaufman's high-speed electron charge-to-mass ratio experiment seemed to contradict the theory, but it was later proven that his conclusion was wrong. But I don't see how this problem can be solved within the current framework, Lin Xian said firmly, shaking his head. This is a complete contradiction. I believe the proof of the completeness of modern physics is definitely incomplete. Wei Yijiang looked deeply at his once prized student, the kind of look one gives a stranger they fear. Lin Xian's every word was like a sharp knife stabbing into his heart. He felt his blood growing colder and colder. You're telling me to abandon the publication of the proof of the completeness of modern physics because of your premonition theory? Wei Yijiang's voice was colder than his blood. You really are a good student. Lin Xian didn't notice the change in Wei Yijiang's tone. He was still lost in his own thoughts. It's not a theory. I believe it's achievable. Wei Yijiang burst into laughter. I never thought I'd produce a student like you. If people knew that my most accomplished student believed in something as superstitious as premonition, where would I hide my face? Sensing that things were going wrong, Su Feng quickly pulled at Lin Xian's arm. Stop talking. Apologize to the professor. Unexpectedly, Lin Xian shook off Su Feng's hand. His face flushed red, and his expression was one of unwavering determination. I'm not wrong. I'll prove it to you. Then you'll see who's at fault. Wei Yijiang gripped the armrest of his chair tightly. Fine, then I must be wrong. How could I dare be your teacher if you're so much more correct than me? Su Feng was horrified, realizing the weight of Wei Yijiang's words. He grabbed Lin Xian's arm again. Please, stop arguing with the professor. Just admit you're wrong. Lin Xian acted as if he hadn't heard Su Feng. His lips trembled slightly, his face turning pale, almost translucent. He stood there motionless, as if in a daze. After a long while, he slowly turned and glanced at the two people in the room, his eyes filled with resolute defiance. Then he began to walk slowly toward the door, murmuring, I'll prove it to you. I will. Wei Yijiang, pale-faced, watched Lin Xian, his eyes filled with pain. Su Feng tried several times to reach out and stop Lin Xian, but each time Wei Yijiang's gaze stopped him. He hoped Lin Xian would turn back on his own, but he was disappointed. Lin Xian wandered aimlessly around the campus. At some point, a light rain began to fall, the cool droplets landing on his body and reminding him that autumn was almost over. In the distance, he faintly heard someone calling his name. It sounded like Jieru's voice. Jieru. For some reason, just thinking of that name made Lin Xian's heart ache. Jieru, Jieru. He silently repeated her name in his mind, like reciting a beloved song. 2 lines of tears rolled down his cheeks, but a stubborn voice within him pushed him to run in the opposite direction. Su Feng shuddered, suddenly feeling that the boy in his arms had become a stranger. What are you doing? He asked himself. This boy is a manifestation of Lin Xian, but why has he come back? Was it just to tell you about that ridiculous murder case? No, he came back to prove something. He wants to prove that Lin Xian from back then was on the side of truth. He wants to destroy everything you have, and he wants your teacher to admit his mistakes from years ago. He wants to announce to the world that he is the true victor. And then there's Jieru. She'll soon know why Lin Xian left back then. How will she see you and her father? And yet, here you are, gently embracing this boy. I just remembered something, the boy said excitedly. The teacher once told me that you pointed out a flaw in his theory back when he first discussed premonition with you. A flaw? Su Feng was momentarily taken aback, but he quickly recalled what the boy was referring to and smiled faintly. Yes, I did discuss something with your teacher, but perhaps it shouldn't be called a flaw. Why not? The boy asked, puzzled. You mentioned that now you can accurately foresee events up to 600 seconds in advance, right? Yes. Based on our earlier discussions, it can actually be proven that you already have the ability to foresee much further into the future. Really? The boy's eyes lit up. Of course, it's true. The proof is simple. For example, if it's going to rain at exactly noon today, then at 11:50 a.m., you'll be able to accurately foresee this event. By the same reasoning, at 11:40 a.m., you can foresee that at 11:50 a.m., you'll predict that it will rain at noon. In reality, this means that at 11:40, you've already accurately foreseen that it will rain at noon. By repeating this process, you could theoretically extend your foresight infinitely, couldn't you? The boy listened intently, tilting his head in thought, looking rather mischievous. But he quickly grasped the concept, and in an instant, he was so excited he nearly jumped up. Yes, that's it. How did I not think of that? It's so simple. The boy couldn't sit still anymore. He wriggled out of Su Feng's arms and plopped down on the ground. I want to try this method right now. It's 10:30 a.m. I'll start by predicting if it will rain at 11 a.m., he said, closing his eyes as if entering a trance. Su Feng smiled. Why not try a bit further ahead? At least until noon, right? The boy hesitated, but finally nodded vigorously. All right then. Su Feng looked expressionless as he watched the boy. In his mind, the boy's face had merged with the image of Lin Xian. An old friend returns with the wind and rain, Su Feng thought, a line of poetry suddenly crossing his mind. For everyone, an old friend often brings memories of past events. And why is it that when old friends return, it's often accompanied by wind and rain? Su Feng sighed softly. Sweat beaded on the boy's forehead, 2 unnatural red spots appearing on his cheeks, while his lips grew pale. Su Feng could still clearly remember the discussion he had with Lin Xian on this very topic years ago. You're making this difficult for me, Lin Xian had said, frustrated, as he rubbed his head. If we follow this logic, we'd end up concluding that we can foresee forever, but that's based on an assumption that we can only predict a few minutes ahead. Obviously, this creates a paradox. Su Feng had been pleased to have stumped Lin Xian. Exactly, it's a dead end. Just based on that, we can judge that the whole idea of premonition is meaningless. Not necessarily, Lin Xian had confidently retorted. Your argument can be framed as foreseeing one's own foresight, which is a recursive problem in mathematics, a function that calls itself. Recursive problems are generally limited by the number of iterations. In other words, you have to exit the recursion after achieving a certain level of precision. Otherwise, you get stuck in an infinite loop. Su Feng had sighed inwardly, feeling the sentiment of why was I born after Lin Xian? But he hadn't given up. Isn't the recursion in premonition an obstacle? That's why I believe we can only ever make limited predictions. Of course, if there were technical breakthroughs, the time span of premonition could be extended. Su Feng had mused, what would happen if we forced this kind of recursive premonition? Lin Xian had thought for a moment. That would cause the computational load to increase exponentially. If a computer tried to do this, the program would crash. And if a human brain tried it, Lin Xian had paused, that person would die of exhaustion. The boy's body began to sway as sweat soaked through his clothes. His lips moved slightly, as if he were muttering something, and his face had taken on a deathly pale hue. Su Feng glanced at his watch. It was 1 minute until 11 a.m. If he remembered correctly, the boy had once said that a murder would occur at this time. Su Feng walked over to the boy, knelt down, and leaned in to listen to what he was saying. Dada, it's noon. It's really raining. Such heavy rain. Washing the world clean. The boy's head suddenly slumped to the side. His words cut off as if severed by a knife, and his entire body collapsed limply to the floor. Su Feng stared blankly at the scene, feeling numb, with no emotions stirring within him. After a while, he slowly stood up, as if waking from a dream, brushed the dust off himself, and began to gather his lecture notes. His hands trembled slightly, making it hard to place the pages in order. It was time to go home. Thinking of Jieru and the children waiting at home, Su Feng felt a brief sense of calm. They had planned to have lunch at his mentor's house today. They were probably already growing impatient. He glanced back at the boy lying on the floor, looking as if he were merely asleep. There were no injuries, no signs of violence. It looked, by all appearances, like a natural death. Su Feng picked up his notes and walked out of the classroom. As he reached the door, he realized the wind outside had picked up considerably, an unusual occurrence for this season. Su Feng tightened his coat and stepped outside. It's about to rain, Su Feng thought, and it's going to be a heavy rain.